After 15 years of saving every penny, I finally purchased my dream property, 10 acres of pristine rural land with rolling hills, mature oak trees, and a creek running through the back corner. The land sat at the end of a long county road, far enough from town to give me the privacy I craved, but close enough to still make grocery runs convenient. I spent the first year building my modest but comfortable three-bedroom ranch house with my own hands, designing it to be as self-sufficient as possible. The pride of my property was the well water system I had carefully researched and installed. It was not cheap, but the crystal-clear water it produced made every dollar worthwhile. I worked with local experts to ensure it was properly permitted, environmentally sound, and built to last decades. The well house itself was a small wooden structure near the main house, weathered but well-maintained. The independence it provided gave me a sense of security I had never known in my previous suburban life. For 3 wonderful years, my mornings consisted of coffee on the porch watching deer graze at the edge of my property while hawks circled overhead. The peaceful existence I had created for myself felt like something out of a dream. I had exactly zero regrets about leaving behind city conveniences for this quiet, independent life. That all changed when the rumbling of heavy machinery began to echo across the valley. A developer had purchased the adjacent 200 acres and was breaking ground on what they called Valley Vista Estates, a suburban-style development of cookie-cutter homes packed much closer together than anything else in the area. I tried to be optimistic, telling myself that perhaps having neighbors would have its benefits. 6 months later, the first wave of new homeowners began moving in. Most seemed nice enough, waving politely when driving past my property. But then came the knock on my door that would change everything. A woman in her late 50s stood on my porch wearing pressed khaki pants and a polo shirt with some kind of logo embroidered on the chest. Her bleached blonde hair was cut in the distinctive angled bob that has become synonymous with a certain type of suburban entitlement. "Hello there, neighbor," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I am Karen Westfield, president of the Valley Vista Estates Homeowners Association. I wanted to personally welcome you to our community and provide you with our bylaws and community standards handbook." She thrust a thick binder toward me. I did not take it. "Thank you for stopping by, but my property is not part of your development. I have owned this land for 4 years now, well before your community existed." Her smile tightened as her eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, I think there is some confusion. Our HOA boundaries extend to all properties along Valley Creek Road. Your rustic setup here falls under our jurisdiction now." "No, it does not," I replied firmly. "My property is grandfathered in as agricultural land. I have the documentation from the county if you would like to see it." Karen glanced past me into my home, then let her gaze wander to my well house visible from the porch. Her nose wrinkled slightly. "Well, regardless of technical boundaries, we all want the area to maintain certain standards. That well equipment, for example, is quite unsightly. We have guidelines about outbuildings that require proper paint and landscaping." I took a deep breath. "Again, my property is not part of your HOA. I appreciate your visit, but your rules do not apply here." She gave me a tight smile as she placed the binder on my porch swing. "Why not look through these anyway? It would be so much nicer for everyone if we all followed the same guidelines. We have a community meeting next Thursday. I strongly encourage you to attend." As she walked away, she paused and turned back. "By the way, we have excellent municipal water service in our development. Those old wells can be so problematic, something to consider." With that, she strode back to her large white SUV, clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. As I watched her drive away, a sense of unease settled over me. Something told me this was just the beginning of what would become a battle for my way of life. The first real warning came from an unexpected source. I was at the local hardware store purchasing supplies when the owner, Bill, an old-timer who had lived in the area for decades, leaned across the counter. "Heard you had a visit from the new HOA queen," he said in a low voice. "Word travels fast," I replied, surprised. "Do you know her?" Bill nodded gravely. "Corinne Westfield. Used to run the Oak Ridge HOA about 30 miles south of here. Got asked to step down after she tried to foreclose on an elderly couple's home over unapproved garden gnomes. No joke. She moved here right after that scandal died down." A week later, another new neighbor named Dave stopped by. He seemed friendly enough, but I could tell he was nervous. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. I live in the new development, and at the last meeting they spent nearly an hour discussing your property, specifically your well system. Corinne claims it violates county regulations and poses a health risk to the rest of us." He looked embarrassed. "I looked into it myself. It does not, but she is on some kind of mission." True to his warning, the next morning I found a fluorescent orange notice taped to my front door. "Violation. Unsightly utility equipment visible from road. Fine. $100. Remedy within 7 days." The paper had the Valley Vista HOA letterhead but no official county markings. I took it down and filed it away, more annoyed than concerned. Over the next month, the notices became a weekly occurrence. Each cited increasingly obscure violations. Improper setback for well house. There was no setback requirement for my property type. Unapproved exterior color. My land was not subject to their aesthetic guidelines. Unpermitted water system. I had all proper permits from the county. Each notice increased the fine amount and grew more threatening in tone. I spent a full day at the county record's office researching my property status. The clerk confirmed what I already knew. My land was legally exempt from the HOA's jurisdiction due to both prior ownership and agricultural zoning. She provided me with certified copies of all relevant documentation, which I kept in a growing file labeled HOA harassment. One evening, as dusk settled over my property, I noticed a white SUV idling at the end of my driveway. Through the fading light, I could make out Corinne's distinctive silhouette behind the wheel, her phone raised toward my property. The realization that she was photographing my home sent a chill through me. This was more than bureaucratic overreach. It felt like stalking. The following week, a certified letter arrived. Unlike the homemade violation notices, this one came on legal letterhead from Westfield and Associates. It demanded that I disconnect my non-compliant well system and pay $8,750 to connect to the development's municipal water supply within 30 days or face legal action. My hands shook with rage as I read through the false claims. The letter cited ordinances that simply did not apply to my property. It referred to community safety concerns and groundwater contamination risks without a single piece of evidence. At the bottom, Corinne had signed as both HOA president and legal representative. As the sun set that evening, I sat on my porch looking out at the land I had worked so hard to own. The well house stood as a symbol of the independence this property represented. The shadows grew longer across my yard as I came to the stark realization that this was not about rules or standards or even safety. This was about control, and Corinne Westfield would not stop until she broke me or I stood my ground. I decided then and there that I would not be broken. I scheduled a consultation with James Harrington, a property rights attorney recommended by several longtime residents. His office was modest but professional, with framed legal documents and local maps covering the walls. After reviewing my growing file of harassment evidence, he leaned back in his chair with a confident smile. "Your water rights are ironclad," he explained. "Your property not only predates the development, but your well was properly permitted and is protected under both state water rights laws and your original property deed. No HOA can force you to abandon a legal water source on your own property." He drafted a formal cease and desist letter addressing the false claims in Corinne's threats. The response came not from Corinne directly, but from the HOA board. An emergency meeting had been scheduled to discuss water compliance measures for all properties bordering the development. Through the local grapevine, I learned what happened at that meeting. Corinne had prepared an elaborate presentation complete with doctored photographs of my well system and fabricated water quality reports suggesting contamination risks to the entire neighborhood water table. Without any actual evidence or expert testimony, she convinced the board to vote unanimously on a resolution demanding all adjacent properties connect to municipal water for community safety. The day after the meeting, another notice appeared on my door. This one dispensed with any pretense of politeness. Final notice: failure to comply with community water regulations will result in immediate legal action, property liens, and county health department intervention. Deadline: 72 hours. That same afternoon, I went to check my well equipment and discovered something disturbing. The main access valve showed clear signs of tampering scratch marks around the fitting, and the lock nut loosened just enough to cause a slow leak. This was not weather damage or normal wear. Someone had deliberately attempted to compromise my water system. With a growing sense of violation and unease, I drove to the nearest electronics store and purchased a comprehensive security camera system. I spent the remainder of the day installing weatherproof cameras at strategic points around my property, focusing particularly on the well house and property lines. The system connected to my phone, allowing me to monitor activity even when away from home. 3 days later, the investment paid off. While at work, I received a motion alert notification. I opened the app to see Corinne Westfield in broad daylight, walking purposefully across my property toward my well house. She wore gardening gloves and carried what looked like a small tool bag. For 15 minutes, the camera recorded her examining my well equipment, taking pictures, and, most disturbingly, using a wrench to adjust fittings on my water system. I felt physically ill watching the footage. This was not just harassment or intimidation anymore. This was criminal trespassing and vandalism. I immediately called my attorney and forwarded the video evidence. He advised me to file a police report but cautioned that it might escalate the situation. After careful consideration, I decided to hold the evidence for now while documenting any additional incidents. Over the next week, the cameras caught Corinne trespassing 3 more times, always during hours when she thought I would be at work. Each time, she examined or tampered with different aspects of my well system. The most alarming incident showed her pouring something from a small bottle near the well housing, though the camera angle made it impossible to identify the substance. The invasion felt deeply personal, a violation not just of my property, but of my fundamental right to security and peace in my own home. As I reviewed the growing collection of video evidence, I realized I was dealing with something far beyond typical neighborhood politics. This had become psychological warfare disguised as community governance. The grainy footage became my first piece of concrete evidence, and I knew I would need to use it carefully to protect myself from whatever Corinne planned next. After another sleepless night contemplating my options, I formulated a plan. Corinne had established a predictable pattern of monitoring the neighborhood on Saturday mornings, driving slowly past my property around 10 a.m. This weekend, I would set a trap to expose her overreach once and for all. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, and mild temperature. I positioned myself near my well house with tools, work gloves, and my phone set to record video. At precisely 9:58 a.m., the now familiar white SUV crawled past my property. I waited until it disappeared around the bend, then began my performance. With deliberate movements designed to be visible from the road, I began shutting off valves on my own water system. I took photographs of each step, documenting the condition of the equipment before and after each adjustment. I made sure to remain entirely on my property, working exclusively on my own legal water system. The main supply valve closed with a satisfying clunk, temporarily stopping water flow to my house, a minor inconvenience for the sake of gathering evidence. Within 20 minutes, my phone buzzed with text messages from 3 different neighbors. Karen just sped past my house toward the HOA president's house. She looked furious. "Heads up, emergency, HOA board meeting being called about your property. Something about water tampering. You need to know Karen is showing people pictures of you vandalizing the water system. Be careful." By early afternoon, a new notice appeared taped to my door. This one bore the official Valley Vista HOA seal and was marked "Emergency Cease and Desist." It demanded I restore community water access immediately and threatened criminal charges for infrastructure tampering. I calmly called the HOA president, a reasonable man named Michael who had always seemed uncomfortable with Karen's crusade. "Michael, I need to clarify something. I simply turned off my own water on my own property this morning. It has absolutely no connection to or impact on the development's water supply." There was a long pause before he responded. "That is not what Karen told the board. She said you were tampering with connection points that could compromise the entire neighborhood system." The confusion in his voice confirmed my suspicion. Karen had been systematically misrepresenting the situation to everyone involved. "I have video documentation of everything I did today," I explained. "I would be happy to show you exactly what happened." "That might be necessary," he replied, sounding troubled. "Karen is insisting we take immediate action. She mentioned involving the authorities." I thanked him and ended the call, then settled in to wait for whatever came next. I did not have to wait long. At approximately 4:30 p.m., 2 police cruisers rolled up my driveway, lights flashing but sirens silent. I stood calmly on my porch as 2 officers approached, their expressions professional but wary. "Good afternoon, officers," I greeted them. "How can I help you?" The older officer, whose nameplate read Martinez, took the lead. "Sir, we received a report of active vandalism of critical infrastructure at this address. Someone reported that you are tampering with the community water system and creating a public safety hazard." The younger officer stood slightly behind, hand resting near his belt as if expecting trouble. "I understand the confusion," I replied calmly. "I would be happy to show you exactly what happened. This morning, I performed routine maintenance on my private well system, which serves only my property. I have documentation showing that my water system is entirely separate from the development's municipal supply." Officer Martinez glanced toward my well house, then back at me. "May we see this documentation?" I invited them into my home and presented the folder of county permits, property deeds with water rights clearly specified, and the recent letter from my attorney confirming my legal standing. As they reviewed the documents, I played the video I had recorded earlier that day, showing exactly what maintenance I had performed. The younger officer spoke for the first time. So you are telling us that turning off your own water has absolutely no effect on the neighboring properties? That is correct, I confirmed. Their development uses municipal water piped in from the county system. My well is a completely independent water source that predates their development by years. Officer Martinez handed the documents back to me. And you have reason to believe someone called this in as an intentional false report. I nodded and pulled out my phone. I also have security camera footage showing someone trespassing on my property multiple times and actually tampering with my well system. Would you like to see that evidence as well? Their expressions shifted from suspicion to professional interest as I pulled up the first video clip. The trap had sprung perfectly closed, but the confrontation was far from over. As the officers reviewed my security footage, the crunch of tires on gravel announced a new arrival. Through my front window, I watched a white SUV screech to a halt behind the police cruisers. Corinne Westfield emerged clutching a leather portfolio folder, her face flushed with what appeared to be righteous indignation. She straightened her polo shirt with the HOA logo and marched toward my house with the confidence of someone who believed she wielded actual authority. Officer Martinez noticed my attention shift. "Are you expecting someone else, sir?" "That would be Corinne Westfield, the HOA president who has been harassing me," I explained. "Based on past behavior, I suspect she is here to escalate the situation." The officers exchanged glances as a sharp knock rattled my front door. When I opened it, Corinne pushed past me without waiting for an invitation, addressing the officers directly as if I were not even present in my own home. "Officers, thank goodness you responded so quickly," she declared, completely ignoring me. "I am Corinne Westfield, president of the Valley Vista Homeowners Association. This man needs to be arrested immediately for criminal tampering with essential utilities and endangering community safety." She thrust her folder toward Officer Martinez, who accepted it with professional neutrality. "We have documented numerous violations by this property owner, but today he crossed the line into criminal behavior by deliberately sabotaging water infrastructure that affects dozens of families." The younger officer, whose nameplate read Diaz, glanced between Corinne and me. "Ma'am, we are still assessing the situation. Mr. Name has provided documentation showing that his water system is private and separate from the community supply." Corinne's expression hardened. "Those documents are outdated. Our HOA has legal jurisdiction over all utility systems in this area regardless of property boundaries." She pulled out elaborately formatted documents with official-looking seals and signatures. This was established when the development was approved by the county commissioner. With methodical calm, I retrieved my previously shown evidence. "Officers, these are the original property deeds showing my water rights, the grandfathering provisions from the county, and confirmation from the records office dated just 2 weeks ago. Additionally, here is a letter from my attorney addressing these exact claims." Officer Martinez began examining both sets of documents side by side, his expression growing increasingly skeptical of Corinne's claims. He directed his next questions to her rather than me. "Ma'am, these HOA documents appear to conflict with county records. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Corinne's composure fractured visibly. A slight tremor appeared in her hand as she pointed aggressively toward my well house. "That is not the point. He is deliberately creating a hazardous situation. Do you know who I am? I have worked closely with Commissioner Jenkins for years. He will not be pleased to hear that his police force is failing to protect our community from this. troublemaker." Her voice had risen to a shrill pitch, and I noticed Officer Diaz taking subtle steps back, creating distance while maintaining a professional demeanor. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. We are simply gathering all the facts." "Facts? I have given you the facts," Karen nearly shouted. "If you will not do your job, I will call the commissioner directly. This man needs to be arrested right now for utility tampering and endangering public health." What none of us had noticed during this escalating confrontation was my elderly neighbor, Harold, standing quietly at the edge of my property line. At 78 years old, Harold moved slowly but missed nothing. His smartphone was raised steadily in his weathered hands, recording every damning second of Karen's transformation from self-appointed authority to increasingly unhinged antagonist. Other neighbors began to appear as well, drawn by the commotion and police presence. A small crowd gathered at a respectful distance, watching in stunned silence as years of intimidation tactics began to unravel in real time. Officer Martinez closed both folders and addressed Karen with firm professionalism. "Ma'am, based on the documentation we have reviewed, it appears Mr. Name was operating entirely within his legal rights on his own property. Furthermore, we have now viewed security footage showing unauthorized entry onto his property and tampering with his private water system. Can you explain why you were on his property without permission multiple times in the past week?" The color drained from Karen's face. That is, as HOA president I have inspection rights." "Not on properties that are not part of your HOA," Officer Diaz interjected, "and certainly not to manipulate someone else's private water system." The look of absolute shock on Karen's face as her perceived authority evaporated would have been satisfying if the situation were not so serious. The tables had turned, and for perhaps the first time, Karen Westfield found herself on the defensive. The aftermath of Karen's confrontation with the police unfolded swiftly. Before leaving my property, Officers Martinez and Diaz spent nearly an hour taking my official statement. They photographed the well equipment, documented the evidence of tampering, and copied my security footage for their report. "We will be filing a comprehensive incident report," Officer Martinez explained as they prepared to leave. "Based on what we have seen today, there are multiple potential charges here: trespassing, filing a false police report, and possibly criminal mischief related to the tampering with your well." Officer Diaz added, "You might want to consider pursuing a restraining order. This situation appears to have escalated beyond normal neighborhood disputes." The following morning, I called James Harrington, my attorney, and scheduled an immediate appointment. When I arrived at his office, I found him already reviewing the police report that had been filed. "They worked quickly," he noted, impressed. "This is extremely thorough documentation." He pulled out a yellow legal pad and began taking notes as I played the complete security footage for him, including all instances of Karen entering my property and tampering with the equipment. His eyes widened at the most damning clip, which clearly showed Karen deliberately loosening fittings and pouring an unidentified substance near my well housing. This crosses from harassment into criminal territory," he explained grimly. "The trespassing alone is actionable, but the deliberate tampering with a water supply could potentially be charged as a much more serious offense." We discussed my options, and I decided to pursue both a restraining order and formal charges. "I do not want revenge," I explained to James. "I just want this to stop and for her to face appropriate consequences for her actions." News spreads quickly in small communities. By that afternoon, my phone was buzzing with text messages from neighbors expressing shock at what had happened. Several shared their own stories of intimidation by Karen, but admitted they had been too afraid of HOA retaliation to speak up previously. The most surprising development came that evening when Michael, the HOA board president, appeared at my door. His usual confident demeanor had been replaced by visible discomfort. "I owe you an apology," he began awkwardly. "The board called an emergency session today after learning about yesterday's incident. We had no idea about the extent of Karen's actions or that she was misrepresenting your property status to us." He explained that Karen had consistently told the board that my property was legally incorporated into the HOA boundaries, but that I was being deliberately noncompliant. She had presented altered maps and selective documentation to support her claims. "We have accepted her resignation from the board, effective immediately," he continued. "And we want to make it absolutely clear that your property is recognized as exempt from our jurisdiction." He handed me a formal letter to that effect, signed by all remaining board members. 2 days later, with James by my side, I filed formal charges: criminal trespassing, property damage, and filing a false police report. The sheriff personally delivered the court summons to Karen's home as several neighbors watched from their windows or front yards, the community's silent acknowledgement that the balance of power had shifted. Karen's careful facade of authority began crumbling completely under the weight of documented evidence and witness testimonies. Several board members came forward with additional information about how she had manipulated HOA records and misrepresented her authority. Her previously intimidated neighbors found courage in numbers, sharing their own experiences of her overreach and bullying tactics. The security footage proved to be the most compelling evidence. When Karen's attorney viewed it during discovery, I later learned he immediately advised her to seek a plea agreement rather than face a full trial where that footage would be shown in open court. As spring turned to early summer, the preliminary hearing date approached. The tables had turned completely. The same legal system Karen had tried weaponizing against me was now holding her accountable for her actual crimes. For the first time in months, I could step outside onto my porch and enjoy the morning air without scanning my property line for white SUVs or checking my well house for signs of tampering. Justice arrived on a bright Tuesday morning in early June. The county courthouse, a stately brick building with white columns that dated back to the 1930s, hummed with activity as I entered with James at my side. We made our way to the assigned courtroom where several of my neighbors had already gathered in the public seating area, offering supportive nods as we passed. Karen sat stiffly beside her attorney at the defendant's table. Her previously confrontational demeanor had been replaced by a subdued, almost defeated posture. She wore a conservative navy suit rather than her usual HOA-branded polo shirt, and she kept her eyes fixed firmly on the table before her. Judge Eleanor Simmons, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for fairness, presided over the proceedings. As the clerk read the charges, criminal trespassing, malicious property damage, and filing a false police report, Karen's shoulders hunched slightly with each count. The evidence presentation was methodical and devastating. The security footage played on the courtroom monitor, showing multiple instances of Karen trespassing and tampering with my well equipment. Officer Martinez testified about the false emergency call and Karen's demands for my arrest. 3 HOA board members testified about how she had misrepresented my property status and her own authority. When Harold, my elderly neighbor, took the stand and described recording Karen's meltdown, several spectators in the courtroom nodded knowingly, his weathered hands gesturing as he spoke about years of watching her bully good people, earned him respectful attention from the judge. The proceedings concluded with Karen accepting a plea agreement rather than risking trial on all charges. Judge Simmons delivered the sentence with appropriate gravity: 200 hours of community service, specifically assigned to the County Water Conservation Department, mandatory property boundary and homeowner rights education, and significant restitution payments for the damage to my equipment and legal expenses. Ms. Westfield, Judge Simmons concluded, the court finds your systematic campaign of harassment and property violations deeply troubling. Homeowners associations serve an important function when managed properly, but they do not supersede established property rights or give anyone license to trespass, damage property, or file false reports. I strongly suggest you reflect on the difference between community service and community control during your service hours. But the victory extended beyond my personal vindication. The case triggered a community awakening as the Valley Vista HOA scrambled to adopt transparent bylaws that explicitly recognized grandfathered properties as exempt from their jurisdiction. The new board, led by Michael and several reform-minded residents, instituted checks and balances on HOA power and created an independent appeals process for disputed violations. Inspired by my stand, several other neighbors discovered their own properties qualified for exemption based on prior ownership or agricultural zoning. Within weeks, 5 households had formally withdrawn from the association, reclaiming their independence from excessive regulations. The restitution check arrived in late July. After covering my legal expenses, I invested the remainder in a comprehensive upgrade to my well system, including new energy-efficient pumps and advanced filtration. The system now operates more efficiently than ever, producing water so pure that neighbors from the development often stop by with empty jugs asking to fill them. Perhaps most meaningful was the transformation in community dynamics. The invisible wall between the original residents and the development newcomers began to dissolve. Neighbors who had once watched in silent fear now exchanged contact information, creating an informal support network against any future overreach. By late summer, the community organized its first-ever joint barbecue on my property. People brought folding chairs and potluck dishes. Children played across property lines without concern for HOA boundaries, and conversation flowed as freely as the cold drinks. No one mentioned Karen's conspicuous absence as we raised glasses to property rights and the courage to defend them. As the golden late afternoon light stretched across my land, I stood at my well house, now painted a clean white with flower boxes that I had chosen to add myself, not because of any regulation. The water flowed clear and sweet, the taste of hard-won freedom. My once threatened rural paradise stood restored, my rights secured not just for myself, but for others who might have fallen victim to similar tactics. As the sound of laughter and conversation drifted across my property, I realized that sometimes standing your ground does more than protect your own rights. It creates ripples that help others find the courage to stand for theirs as well.